It was Anzac Day a couple of weeks ago. Many of us shrugged and didn't go to work. Probably some of you more actively avoided the pageantry of that day, and maybe some of you went to a dawn service and before a game of two-up you marched through the city in your brown slouch hat with the side turned up. Did anyone have to explain it to someone from overseas, to someone visiting? It's not easy. Even after you've explained the details of this disastrous World War I side quest, they look at you like, what's the punchline? And then you go, well, but White Australia saw itself at the time as a brand new country. And so this was like Australians, and New Zealanders, they were there too, but Australians being shot, but on the world stage. And then they're like, wow, you really care about this Anzac thing. And you're like, no, I don't. Has no one else had this experience? Is this just me? So much for a relatable introduction. Thing is, someone who doesn't identify as Australian isn't the audience, because a national myth is a story that we tell ourselves about ourselves. I don't mean myth like common misconception, and I don't mean story like fiction. A national myth is often based on real events, but it's the way those events are remembered, capturing the public imagination, being told and retold, and yes, then details get changed, but it gets baked into the culture. It becomes an answer that we can always reach for to the question, who are we? And yes, that then means, who aren't we? National myths have consequences. The Anzac mythology tells us that we are white men, that we are a tiny country at the mercy of big powers. Maybe that's not a useful thing to tell ourselves anymore, if it ever was. On the other hand, I've always liked the fact that it's a defeat. It's not a victory. We don't get to remember it as good triumphing over evil. Exodus is the beginning of the story of the nation of Israel. Genesis was about a family. By Exodus, they've become a people. Today's passage is the climax of the escape from Egypt story. But the story of this people and their God, or more accurately, this God and their people, continues right through the Old Testament, through the wanderings in the wilderness, through the conquest of the land, the establishment of one kingdom and then two, the Babylonian exile and return. And the New Testament is explicitly framed as the continuation of that story. We as Christians are invited to see ourselves as the spiritual descendants of those Israelites who God saved from slavery in Egypt, as God's people. Now, there are some who only want to read this narrative as historical fact. This is exactly what happened, exactly as described. I think that's a really limiting way to read the Bible in general, but especially the Exodus story. There are a couple of problems. First, it just makes more sense as a story. Robert Alter compares the early chapters to a fairy tale with an evil king and a foundling child. The 10 plagues are repetitive and formulaic because they're plot coupons. They provide predictability and structure while building tension. And so Moses and Aaron collect their 10 plot coupons and they can send off for the ending. And what an ending! Just when the Israelites think they've got away, they look up and they see the entire Egyptian army coming for them, and they are trapped between the army and the sea. Why does Pharaoh bring every single chariot? Maybe he's going for shock and awe, but it seems like a huge amount of force to capture some exhausted pedestrians. But from a storytelling perspective, it makes sense as the moment where it seems like all is lost, so that Moses can show remarkable faith by, even before he's spoken to God, saying, "Do not be afraid, stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today." And then Moses, plucked as a baby from the water and the reeds, parts the sea of reeds and saves his people. Oh yeah, it actually says sea of reeds, which could apply to several uncrossable bodies of water around there. Why has it been remembered as the Red Sea? Because it's the biggest. And the villainous Pharaoh who ordered Israelite babies drowned, who threw everything he had at God, who wanted a spectacle, gets a spectacle. Right in the face. Boom! Take that, Egypt. Don't mess with Israel. Now, maybe this was based on real events, but the way it's written follows narrative logic, not historical logic. But the second issue is that there is no historical or archaeological evidence that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt. Now, you can't prove a negative, so maybe they were there. But many historians believe Israel actually came from the merging of different ethnic groups in and around Canaan into one culture and religion. That Genesis, Exodus, and beyond are actually stories from individual tribes retold as a single genealogy and history. It's just a theory. But if the Israelites were in some ways an invented or composite people, then we can see the attraction of an origin story in which the one most powerful God chooses and rescues them. That's what a national myth does. It gives what might otherwise be separate groups something to latch onto, to say, this is who we are together. So who are they together? At first glance, this seems like a story of good triumphing over evil. It's like an action movie. The heroic Moses, exiled for standing up for his fellow Israelite, returns to save his people from the villainous Pharaoh, boo hiss. But thanks to God's power, the Israelites walk off into the sunset to cleanse the land of those nasty Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and of course the Jebusites. Who are we? We are the winners. We can be surrounded by enemies, and if we stand firm in our faith, our God will destroy them. All of those dead Egyptians, well, they should have picked a better God, shouldn't they? It doesn't matter what happens to people who aren't us. The Egyptians tried to drown the Israelite babies, so they were all drowned. Justice. There's plenty of national and cultural myths that feature oppression and injustice perpetrated against us by a common enemy. But the thing is, a common enemy is only unifying when it remains a threat. If what really defined and united the 12 tribes of Israel was victory over the Egyptians, then the Egyptians would need to keep returning, to menace the Israelites, to get revenge, to tempt them from their godly path. Instead, the Egyptians disappear from the story. There's no sense of the inherent evil of Egyptianness in contrast to Israelititude. They don't even have names. God has to repeatedly harden the Pharaoh's heart just to get him to play the villain. We do meet the Israelites' worst enemy in this passage, and it's not Pharaoh. In verses 11 to 12, the Israelites turn on Moses. What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? We told you, let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. In the action movie version, this is the cowardly sidekick freaking out, so Moses can sweep back his golden locks and say, verse 14, the Lord will fight for you and you have only to keep still, with the connotation of this being the part you should keep still. But the audience identification character isn't Moses. It's the complaining, ungrateful, rebellious, give up at the first sign of trouble Israelites. Yes, they're infuriating, and that frustration should be directed inwards, not towards some other. These are not the Jews who lurk around John's gospel, refusing to recognize Jesus as if they're some separate ethnicity to all the other characters. This is a story they are telling themselves about themselves. Who are we? We're the people who, when God provides miraculous, spectacular salvation, want to turn around and run in the opposite direction, back to slavery, violence, and injustice. In the wilderness, God gives them food, water, laws, direction, and there is constant rebellion, resulting in none of the people who escaped from Egypt being allowed to actually enter the land, not even Moses. At the end of the book of Joshua, Joshua basically says to the next generation, God's given you this land. Now, can you keep it? I don't think you can do it. And the Israelites go, yeah, no, we can do it. All you need to do, Joshua says, is follow and serve the Lord. Can you do that? Yeah, totally. Generations later, the prophets say, Israel, Judah, what are you doing? You're not following the law or serving the Lord. He's going to take away everything he gave you. And the kings and the other prophets go, nah, we're God's people, we'll be fine. He'll just do a Red Sea thing or something. An exile in Babylon doesn't just want to hear a rousing tale of how we got to the promised land. They want to know, why aren't we still there? So why would Israel take as a national myth a story of oppression and humiliation by a major power? Because that was mostly their experience. Is it really hard to see why someone forcibly taken to Babylon would connect with a story of their people continuing to survive in a foreign land? Or, for that matter, a first century Judean living under Roman occupation? Or the embattled Christians who Peter addresses in his first letter as exiles in their own countries because they are trying to cling to their beliefs against powerful cultural forces. Or even someone today who knows that God is about love, kindness, and justice, who does not abandon their faith even when they see it twisted by those in power into something hateful. God always hears their people's cries, whether the people are crying out to them or crying that they want to run away from them. God saves them anyway. Not immediately, not usually everyone, but ultimately. The sea is parted, the new generation settles in Canaan, the exiles return. Do not be afraid, stand firm, and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still. This is not a story of a powerful people and their victory. It's a story about a powerless people and their survival. So for we who consider ourselves God's people, what does following and serving the Lord actually look like today? Well, the next thing that happens in Exodus is God gives them the law. And it's a lot more than just 10 commandments. For a modern reader, all the cubits and offerings and defiling skin diseases can seem arbitrary, restrictive, and not at all relevant to our lives. But then as Christians, we also believe that Jesus saved us from the burden of all those rules, that God will save us simply because we choose to be his people. Sadly, Christianity often manages to take the worst of both of those ideas. So you have arbitrary legalism. Homosexuality is wrong. Wives, submit to your husbands. Slavery is okay because Paul didn't unequivocally demand Philemon release Onesimus. Well, that all seems kind of rough, but it's what the Bible says. So, and simultaneously, we have the idea that nothing is required of us except to stand firm. So, stay pure and don't engage with the world. Fortress Christianity is a story many Christians tell themselves about who they are. But there's another story, and it's always been there. Eagle-eyed readers of the Gospels can get an inkling of Jesus' feelings about literal, legalistic interpretations of the Scriptures. Instead, he showed how they are about justice, and compassion. We can read the law as a major cultural shift towards justice. As Adrian said recently, an eye for an eye means only an eye for an eye, not a generations-long blood feud. And throughout the prophets, there are passages like this one. This one's from Micah 6. "O my people, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? Answer me. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery. And I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam." And the human asks, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the Lord on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" And the reply, "He has told you what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God." We live in a world where fighting for justice and the vulnerable and the marginalized is seen as an individual choice. You can donate to charity or join a protest, just don't disrupt the traffic. Collective, society-wide moves away from structural injustice are seen as too expensive, politically untenable, extremist. We want to make sure Australian families have the choice to serve the Egyptians or die in the desert. How do we be God's people in this context? We tell ourselves these stories about the people who lived in a land of milk and honey, vegan options available, but forgot to take care of the most vulnerable among them. About a migrant people who survived the most brutal oppression. About a people caught between the army and the sea who God spectacularly saved, but not before they completely lost it and wanted to run away from God. We tell these stories and we remember that they're about us.